Great. About to stream. Joanne, nice. We've got a really nice group today. Not that we don't normally, but I mean, lots of kind of familiar names within the community. And yeah, great. So we'll get started. It's already 2 minutes past 8. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is our second in the series on migration, and this is a collaboration between SI Singapore and SI Mumbai, and we're really excited because we've been going through this journey together as part of systems innovation kind of hubs, and we started at the same time. We went through the learning journey together, and we're trying to grow the community at the same time. It's been quite a challenge over the last couple of years, and so obviously we've been really excited to actually have a chance to work together. Because of the pandemic, we've not actually had a chance to kind of meet or do any of the things that we probably would have liked to have tried. And so this series we actually started looking at in December last year, and it was because we were all so busy we didn't actually get the chance to really do anything. So we kind of took our time at the beginning of the year, and we'd already selected the theme of migration. And what we thought was really interesting was to see not just the first order impacts of migration and how we assume migration takes a certain form, but also what the other impacts of that are at a systemic level. So it's not an area we're all super familiar with. So we've been exploring it. In our first session, we kind of had more of an exploration on our own personal ideas and perspectives on what migration brought and what it meant and the terms within it and those ideas that we held. And then we're in this session obviously going to hear from Adela and Murshidah, who will be sharing some of their first-hand experience of kind of working with people who are migrants of some kind. And we'll have a first part of the session which kind of hears from them, and then afterwards we'd love to have your questions to them, and also hopefully for you all to share any of your perspectives and to make it more of a kind of an interactive and engaging discussion rather than just kind of a one-way broadcast to everybody. So hopefully we can dig a bit deeper. We didn't record last week's session because we felt it was quite a sensitive topic and quite personal, but in this case we are recording it just so everyone knows, and it's being streamed live on YouTube. The other part is just to say that it can be a sensitive subject, so we'd like to ask obviously for us to be mindful of what we might say or what we might receive. People may not frame it correctly, but I'm sure the intention's quite honourable, and just to hopefully hear candidly from all of you as well later on what your perspectives are, and just say we're kind of not just framing migration from a kind of a stress-induced perspective, although that's obviously very kind of poignant thing that's going on right now, and often constantly is, but not always well covered in the news. But we just want to say, hopefully it can open our perspectives a bit more. So the session is 90 minutes, and we may or may not kind of finish early or continue the conversation. So I will not go on anymore. Thank you for your time. I'll briefly introduce our two speakers, or our two kind of panelists, and then we'd love to kind of get started, and Maya will lead the questions. And later on, if you have comments or questions, please put them into the chat, and we'll ask you to kind of call out to you and say, would you mind asking your question? And we'd love to hear more from you guys as well. So without further ado, our first panelist is Murshidah, and Murshidah is a multi-award-winning international speaker and advisor on personal and corporate transformation. She's a graduate of NUS, that's National University of Singapore for those who aren't based in Singapore, and has a Bachelor of in economics and sociology. She has successfully run businesses for more than 20 years, expanding those throughout Asia. And her work involves conducting training with government bodies, multinationals, corporations, and SMEs and professionals, but also to marginalized groups such as refugees, low-income families, and the homeless. So thank you for joining us, Murshidah. And Murshidah's key message and topics kind of look at organizations and businesses and include really focusing on kind of this aspect of like positive workplaces, emotional intelligence, the power of giving, and kind of organizational excellence through love and respect. And we'll dig a bit deeper into why that is throughout our session. And so her work kind of looks at kind of branding and grooming, but also kind of transformation as well. And she also coaches entrepreneurs to increase profits and business impact through creating sustainable social enterprises within their businesses. So welcome, Murshidah. Thank you for joining us. And our next speaker will be Adela, and Adela is a cross-disciplinary visual artist and designer, specializing in systems and interactions. Her work explores systems through their imbalances and mismatches in the context of inclusivity and long-term relatability. This proposition is one of the main threads in her doctoral work, and it deals with complexity and the question, how might we design beyond inclusion? How do we design for belonging? Quite a big question, that one. So she is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and contributes to implementing in social design and systems thinking in her graduate and postgraduate curricula in higher education. Alongside engaging her visual practice, Adela is currently working as an academic in design, in practice and theory at the University of Derby, the Open University, and Nottingham Trent University. And those are all universities I grew up hearing about in the UK, as well as collaborating and designing with the Systems Innovation Hub in London and the Royal Society of Arts Good Work Guild. So thank you for agreeing to join us as well, Adela. And I know that having had personal interactions with both of you, both got a lot of passion and very interesting perspectives. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Maya, and Maya will kind of lead the conversation to start with.
Thanks, Marisa. Thanks for introducing our esteemed panelists for today. And thanks, Adela and Murshidah, for agreeing to do this along with us and sharing about your experiences and the perspectives you have on working with the migrants, refugees, the homeless, people who are not as privileged as many of us are around the globe. So I just like to get us started with, how are you arriving today? How are you feeling right now? So maybe if Adela, you go first.
Hi, so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. But I'm very well, and I'm just looking forward to hopefully not just us talking here, but perhaps our guests asking questions. Please feel free to put stuff in the chat, and would love to address things directly, keep things conversational, because this is really a topic that just should be conversational to begin with and then moved into action. But yeah, I'm very well and I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Pleased to hear that. Thank you. Murshidah, we'd also like to hear how you are checking in and what are you feeling at the moment?
Oh, thank you so much, Maya, for that question. I love that question when someone asks, how are you feeling today? I feel grateful. I am feeling awesome. And I just came back from a very high vibe retreat where I got to ride horses. I spent a lot of time with horses, and, horses get me on this high energy, and I'm at the right place at the right time with this energy that I'm bringing here. And with that in mind, also, it is a feeling of being able to contribute. I feel that there's a lot of things that happened over the last few days that has got me thinking about things that I can create with my purpose. And that's what I'd love to share here as well. So I'm feeling basically awesome, high vibe, and grateful. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. And I can see that energy is kind of passing on. So I would like to ask you next, that where on the globe, as in where are you physically located right now? And is that where you were born and you always belonged? Or you have come to a place, you've migrated from another place? If you could just walk us through that journey, that will be amazing, Murshidah.
Thank you. I'm from Singapore, born and bred Singaporean. And I live in Kuala Lumpur right now. I married a Malaysian, whose family is from Penang, and he was also not born in Malaysia. He was born in Manila in Philippines, and we got married, and we're back here. We're here where he is, and I'm here. After 2 years we spent in Singapore, and he decided, he got a job in Malaysia at that time, so we all moved here, and that has brought me here. And I mean, it's not a place that I thought I'd end up living in, when I was younger, but it's where I feel very much at home right now, with my family. So yeah. Kuala
Amazing.
Lumpur. Yeah.
Thank you. Adela, over to you. What's your story? Where are you speaking to us from? And have you always belonged there?
I'm currently in the Midlands in the United Kingdom. So I'm in a county called Derbyshire. And if you look at the map of Britain, I'm kind of right in the middle. So, which is not where I'm from originally. I was born in Yugoslavia. Country doesn't exist anymore. But today that will be Bosnia. And my kind of migration journeys, definitely multiplicities, started as a refugee in the war. So my mother and I, we're Bosniaks, so we're ethnic Muslims from Bosnia-Herzegovina, and we kind of fled the country because of the genocide and ethnic cleansing in the 90s, and ended up living in many, many different countries and many different refugee communes as you get moved about. But further along in my life, due to my career, so not just in my design, but also as a student, I've been moving around kind of West Balkans, Central Europe, West Europe, and kind of all the way around again. And I think there's something that happens to, what in literature we call accelerated identity shifts in adapting to new home environments and what that might mean. So I'm actually exploring a lot of that with some of the communities that I work with in inner city Derby. Belonging, I'm trying to define it myself right now. There's some great work on it, but I think to define it myself, I find that still quite difficult, but I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit. So that's me. There you go.
Amazing. So I mean, just to unpack parts of what you've said, I would love to hear from you. If when was it that you started, or you had this idea that you need to work with migrant communities or refugee communities, and is there any particular person or an incident, especially because you said you've also faced that kind of movement as a child? Was there anything that shaped your work as it is today?
That's an excellent question. It was one of those things that you have to ask yourself when you're writing a proposal, like, where on earth did this begin? Like, how and when and why? And, when you're growing up, when you're kind of uprooted from a very early age, and you kind of moved about, and you're trying to figure out what is the culture that I have, and, you're generating these hybrid identities over and over again, that you start to think, well, there is something in relatability to a particular time and space. And to me, this was something that I was battling with my whole life. You have these questions of, well, how much do I need to adapt to belong somewhere? What about the people around me? They have a similar story. What is it for them? And these began in a very simple way, almost primitive, childlike reasoning. And then, kind of 30 odd years onwards, I feel like this is becoming really tangible. And I did a project for the Royal Society of Arts, which was looking into mismatches in the immigration system in the UK. And that's for the first time in all the kind of, in the history of my work, where my work became autoethnographic. I was working with people who had complicated migration backgrounds before, and communities who were on the marginalized spectrum. But that was the first time the questions were becoming very biographical, and you started to draw out methodologies that included, yes, ethnographies of that particular group of people in the area, but also the autoethnographic part, which I felt should not be excluded anymore. And in doing so, it really helped map out the issues within the system and within the scale that was for me tangible to even make sense of, to understand there's so many pain points within these systems that we access. And that's where my real journey began, like this kind of tangible journey. The kind of mental journey was there from the very beginning. And that was, gosh, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I can't even, it was a while ago. So yeah, and I've been in it since in different capacities. So that's been my journey in.
Amazing. Thank you. And we're going to, like you said, we're going to get back deeper into this, maybe when you get to share a couple of examples or something about your work. But we're just scratching the surface just yet. So bear with me. So Murshidah, when I read about your work, you have been a social entrepreneur for over 20 years. You've worked with government stakeholders, civil society organizations. You've worked with people who we would say typically are from the bottom of the pyramid. And also you bring in your own experience of working with the homeless, refugees. So, one of the questions that I like asking people is, let's say you meet somebody for the first time at a wedding or a party, and you just get into a conversation and they're like, okay, what is it that you do for a living? So if you could tell us, what do you do for a living? So that'll be interesting to know from your own, in your own words.
Thank you. It's difficult for me to explain exactly what I do because I run several projects, right? And
Right.
to put it in a nutshell, I say I spread love and respect, and I teach people to have love and respect and do it through action in their lives. So when I work with, when I work with CEOs, with business owners, when I work with corporations, it is to instill love and respect in the organization so that they work better with each other. They become better customer service, officers. They lead consciously. That's the purpose. And when I coach business owners, it's like, yeah, let's get to your from ground up, from 0 to 5,000 to 20,000 US dollars within 90 days. I mean, then you have a real business. So 5 to 20,000. And what are you going to do with that money? Where do you channel that money? And how do you do good through that business? Because, it is so common for us to, just run a business and, create profits, grow more profits. And what's the purpose of that when you are destroying the environment? You're, you're using people or using animals. So why not do good through business? And doing good is good for business, in fact. So that is what I teach business owners. And because I do a lot of mindset work, I do a lot of especially money mindset work. And I find that, working with, I used to do a lot of charity, and, that with my family, we run a business, and every weekend we go feed the homeless as part of the, training I wanted my daughter to have instead of taking her to the mall every weekend, right? So we go do our charity work. And I found that from doing charity for many years, I found that, we feeding the homeless, we got to be friends with them. We got to, help them in, try to get them jobs. But somehow we've met a lot of them that go back to where they are. And we were saying that, I teach people in terms of breaking past certain limiting beliefs and breaking past certain thought patterns. Why not do something for the marginalized community, for them to start making money and do something? And it was something that was quite challenging for me because, you think that you give something like, oh, what does the homeless need? They say they want a home, they want a job, right? You give them both and they end up in the streets again. And I said, it's something to do with the mindset. So that's where we started to work on training programs instead, to just coach and train them on the mindset. And that's the work that I do. And refugees started in 2015 when we were doing a lot of training for the low-income single moms to help them start their own small businesses. And we found out there was a group of refugees who said they wanted to learn as well. And this came from a friend who was, working with refugees. And we were like, oh, we've never had any connections with refugees before. So we said, yeah, why not? We'll sponsor them into the program. And we met like 50 amazing women from Syria at that time. And they were learning, we heard of their stories. And we started to like, why don't we do more of that? So right now, my work involves not just working with low-income people, sex workers, to help them come out of poverty. I also work with refugees here in Malaysia, because the refugees do not get much support here in Malaysia in terms of jobs and children going to school. They're here on transit. If they're under UNHCR, they're here on transit. So sometimes that transit can take up to like 10 years, so that's what we found out. So what do they do in the meantime? So that's where we said, why not help them create something sustainable through education, through mindset change, and do a successful business, create a successful business so that they can also help their own communities. And while they're here on transit, they do something good. And that's the work that I have done. And I'm very grateful that I've seen a lot of transformations that happen over the last couple of years with refugees becoming TEDx speakers, and even contributing back to the local orphanages and low income here in Malaysia. So that's the work that I do. And yeah, I'm very excited about the work that I do.
So are we. Thanks for sharing. And again, we would definitely get back to the refugees becoming TEDx speakers bit. We would love to hear more about that. But just in terms of, I'd like to know that there are certain power structures, certain policies, maybe even distribution of resources in any country, right? Which kind of keeps the system in place when we talk about dealing with migrancy or refugee rehabilitation and all of that. So can you share from your experience of having interacted with the homeless or refugees? What are some of these structures that are holding the system in place? Maybe you can also tell us that how love and respect helps shift those mindsets, because I did hear you say that you work on a lot of mindsets, which is so important even from a systems perspective. We are trying to constantly break those mental models, those attitudes and beliefs. So if you could speak to that a little, that would really help.
From my perspective, I can tell stories. I can tell stories of what I have done, and also some of the successes that I have achieved, right? So what we saw was when one of the reasons why we decided to do actively, since our weekends were free anyway, that we were reaching out to charities and homeless as a family. It all started as a family activity, right? Before we put it into our business model. What we realized was that they just didn't know how to get out of this. There was one example, and this was one of the breakthroughs that we had. A 60-year-old woman. She's still selling her, she's still in the sex industry for whatever amount that she can take just to support herself, because her family cannot accept her because of her past, and society also does not support her. And she finds that she has nothing else to do, and she does not know what else to do. And that is what she's been doing. And it has become a norm for her. And she says, what can I do? This is my fate, So that was one example where we decided to create like community leaders within a certain groups of communities to empower them, one thing, to find their worth. And when we create the community model with these groups of people, we make sure that, look, if anyone is down, everyone support each other, because it does not help when one person is down and then you all try to, not support, and in the end, nobody helps. So everybody is meant to support one another, make sure nobody goes hungry. And if anybody needs help and to get out of certain trade, that's where we are here. But there must be action that they must take to not go back there. That means they must do certain work to get out of it, not to go back to that state themselves, the old state themselves. So that is how we work with them through the community model. And it was not all successful. we've had people who like came in and say, yes, I wanna pray again, I wanna, be good again. I mean, whatever it is that they said, but they still went back to that old trade. And there were some people who said that they did apply, they started something like selling food on the street and they managed to come out of that. So but we still do not give up on them. We still ask, how can we support them, at least their children, make sure their children goes to school. So I have a friend who has she's a lawyer, she makes cards, identity cards for the children, so at least they can go to school. And that is one thing that we can help them to break that pattern.
Right.
But mindset is for me, is something that it's a whole belief system that they really believe that's what they are meant to do, even though they say, I don't want to. So it takes a process, and it takes years sometimes, but we have seen successes. We have seen people who like a low-income single mom starting her own business, and she has gone for Hajj. She has even donated. She's joined our programs when we were doing for the low income, and she came in and she said she wants to donate. She wants to cook for the people. And it has been, there are people who are breaking through like this. So this is what we do. We will, for every communities that we work with, whether they're homeless, sex workers, refugees, or low income single moms, we create communities with them, find a community leader that has certain leadership qualities, and we monitor them to make sure mainly that nobody goes hungry, that nobody has their kitchen empty, at least get food on the table. And then we'll do one step at a time: the mindset, the community, the love and respect, the feeling of belonging. And if they say they want to get out of a certain problem, we make them commit to, let's get out, let's make sure that you get out of this challenge, that this income level. That's the one. Yeah.
Wow, more power to you. Thank you so much for doing this and for sharing it with us. So it's pretty much the question over to you, Adela. We really want to understand, what are those structures? And of course, the structures don't stand by themselves. There are attitudes and beliefs that make those structures, and we as humans have house those attitudes and beliefs. So I want you to address this question from both your personal journey as well as your professional journey, as to what are some things that hold the problem of migration in place.
Sure. I will just turn to something that Murshidah was just saying, which is linking back to, mindset. And it's the mindset that perpetuates negative societal behaviors and that kind of leads into, unsustainable communities, is often something that's been built up by a very imbalanced system in the first place. So, for example, if we're looking at migrants who are just coming into the UK, very much dependent where they're coming from, depending what sort of passport they have, and what privileges are tied to that passport, they will have different access to the systems around them. And when people just enter a new home environment, they have an intrinsic need to belong. And this kind of belonging could be dissected into areas of belonging in the sense of, I want to benefit from what's around me, but it comes through, I want to invest what's around me so I can benefit from it. So it's a kind of reciprocal thing. Now, when are people met with othering or points of exclusion where they can't contribute, they can't participate, they can't benefit from something, the mindset starts to shift. And the mindset starts to accumulate these very negative identity shifts where, a lot of people who come to a country who have already had pretty much developed professional practices, had some very high levels of education, or if not, they'll have an equivalent in experience and in practice, whatever profession might be, or any human endeavor that might be. But because of these points of exclusion, people get othered, and that identity gets suppressed. So they get reduced to being the migrants or being the refugee or whatever else. So there's almost a sense of identity lost that then feeds into that mindset of, well, I can't do anything anyway, so I'm just going to find a different way to do this. So if the points within the system that assure others to succeed are not available to you, what you're going to do is you're either going to find a different way to do it, which means you create in parallel systems that are problematic for the various different reasons, or you'll find ways of just existing merely and finding yourself in this state of mediocrity, which, like Murshidah was implying, you know, a lot of these mindsets are regressive. So in my work, I wanted to address the issue before it becomes a mindset. So right at the beginning. And in order to do so, I had to work with people like Murshidah, with people who are working with the communities, who are on the forefront of dealing with not just the symptoms of the issues, but the cause of the issues. But in order for me to figure out what comes before it, this is really important. It becomes a very fine qualitative study of people's experiences. And, you know, it's important to understand where are these points of exclusion. And if we look at the structures that are holding a system, like the kind of circumambient system, what we call in systems thinking, it's a multitude and a multiplicity of systems that are already established. For example, I was doing a lot of work with people who have just arrived, and they're predominantly people with refugee or complicated migration background. And when I asked them, you know, what is it that you really need now? What could it be? And a lot of the time it comes down to knowing, how do I even access healthcare here? Because I don't know how to do it. Or, you know, how do I get a job? Can I get a job? Can I go into education? Because I was just studying over there, and right now, because of my visa, I can't. I have to wait 6 months or 3 years, depending on which tier you're on. So the existing structures that we have in terms of education, healthcare, a financial tax system, they're propping this system up. So as you start to map this out, you recognize the pain points aren't necessarily in this kind of circumambient perimeter that the immigration system is. They lie underneath in these structures that generate the subsystems of that big system. I'm saying systems a lot, apologies. My students threat this when they're like, oh gosh, she's going to talk about systems again. But yeah, just to kind of get it across. But in order to recognize where a mismatch might be in a system, you have to understand the experiences that already have taken place. You know, who are the people who are dealing with that right now? And then where could we find leverage points to maybe, you know, decrease the number of people who might be working with people like Murshidah in the long term, so that they can be channeled into more sustainable ways of generating communities and continuing their lives. What I'm very interested in is this kind of almost deliberate sense of identity that migrants undergo when they change different environments. And it's linked to this sense of belonging, but I argue against it. I say it's building coefficients of belonging. It's a process. And there's something about how do we generate this reciprocal motion? And when people feel excluded, what I do basically, because I'm an artist, I like to explore visually what is happening with people. I would ask people, okay, on your way to the shops today, do me a little scribbledy map of what is important to you. What are the things that you notice around you? And they're like, could it be anything? It could be anything. And they go, I wish I had it with me, but it will be like just the back of a receipt, you know, from the pound shop. And what they'll have on it, I almost want to demonstrate it. But anyway, they were just like little maps of squares that connected, almost like a little map. And I was like, oh, there's a little map of squares. What do they mean? And I said, okay, but what are the squares? And the person said, well, where I'm from, it's really important to know, this was somebody with refugee background. They said, where I'm from, it's really important for me to know where gas meters are. I'm like, oh, gas meters, what does that mean? And they said, well, gas meters mean certain services, and I plan my week according to these services. And, you know, some that I can afford, some that I can't, and so on and so forth. And then I looked at it again, and some of the squares had a dot next to them. And I was like, okay, what's that? And they were saying, those I can't access. What do you mean you can't access? And they said, well, because the color of my skin, I feel uncomfortable. People treat me not nicely. Or I went in and I can't afford it. I don't have money for this. Or, you know, and suddenly these little squares with dots in them became points of exclusion within the system. And that kind of blew my head off, because I thought, there's something in the visual language of these exclusions that we're missing. So I'm exploring what is the data that we miss. And in order to recognize what we know properly, we need to understand what we miss. And this is a kind of exploration that is ongoing. I went on a massive tangent, apologies, but it was kind of linking into what Murshidah was saying. I hope that made sense.
Absolutely. No, it's amazing how you connected the dots for us. And thank you for doing it so wonderfully. In fact, I mean, I'm just going to need a moment to pause because I'm just soaking in all of that information. And as you were speaking, I could also reflect back on last week's session where we had a guest, Anne-Marie, who was talking about, having a St. Helena passport and how it looks like a British passport, but it has limitations, like you mentioned right at the beginning. And, what are the privileges you get, and how she has had to migrate over 20 or 25 times. Also adding to that was, her identifying as transgender. And there were so many layers to that story. And, that is what was playing in the back of my mind while you were describing all of this. So like I said, I'm going to take a moment, but I saw a question in the chat box. So I'm going to request if Jessie could, maybe unmute and ask. Otherwise, I can read out the question.
Oh, which question? First one?
The first one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I study systems change for years. I've been developed a method of researching natural systems opposed to theoretical ones, and see some increasing societal and personal struggle as challenges to everyone around the world, really. And do immigration patterns reflect that?
It's a very interesting question. I think they do. If you look at them, particularly in terms of demographics, you'll see correlations. I wish I've been doing some mapping on that. I think we need to talk. I think we need to exchange some notes. But basically, I was investigating an area in a city, Derby, that has been kind of in absolute fluxus when it comes to demographic change. And the changes seem to be underpinned by kind of systemic shifts, very narrow ones, but still systemic shifts. For example, if there was a kind of shift in the civic economy alone, not kind of expanding, you'll see people migrating out of an area, and then the kind of behaviors that came with the emigration, if we're looking at the kind of small microspaces into macrospaces, there is a change of attitude, and it came with the sense of status, or how do I even put it? There's something about an identity shift towards leaving mediocrity. I can't quite put a frame around it, but it's certainly a pattern that I've recognized and I'm still trying to work out. And I think I need to do more mapping. But I think that we need to talk about it a lot more. But possibly people who've done a lot more work around direct response as well. But I see there's more things in the chat. Apologies. Oh, but please keep the questions coming as well. Please, Murshidah might have some stuff to add.
Yeah, well, I can just share about my own personal experience again. I mean, I'm more a person who does things on the ground and just does things to just help people, right? So I've seen for the refugee crisis that happened in Malaysia, and looking at the people that actually come in, it's most of them say they're here because there's no other places that they can go or accept them without visa. So a lot of them just come to Malaysia because Malaysia accepts them without visa. So once they're here, okay, fine, they're safe. Now it's about what to do next. And the first thing they do is, of course, they register with UNHCR, and that puts them on the list for them to be relocated. And it's indefinite. They just don't know what happens. So they got to figure out what to do while they are here. So many of them do look out for their own communities, people they already know here, and kind of stick together, get support. Some of them want to stay away and just be amongst themselves, be with themselves and family, or integrate with the Malaysians. And that's what I see here. And a lot of them came here not by choice, but there's no other place to go, because this is the place that doesn't require visa. Yeah, and they just accept. Yeah, so and there was like a lot of like 350,000, if I'm not mistaken, for the last documented ones that I saw statistically that are here in Malaysia. Yeah, so for us, personally, I feel very grateful that my path is crossed with people from all of these countries, because I get to know what they go through, not only in their own countries, and we say, oh, poor you, that's terrible and all that, but what happens here when they move, and also the prejudice that they face in a new country, and whether, even though that they are here, are they fully received by the community? That's another thing. And a lot of them feel that they are not, and they have to find their way to make friends and fit in and all that. And just recently, a couple of days ago, in fact, I had one a refugee who was pregnant, and her child passed away about a week. She just found out. The reason why she doesn't know is because they couldn't afford medical care. And you were talking about healthcare. How much is it healthcare, right? That's one of the main concerns, because as a foreigner, their rates are higher than the locals. And as a foreigner also, they can only send their kids to private schools. They can't send them to public schools. So that costs money again. And this man, when he got my number, he was like, he was frantic. He said, oh, he has to have immediate emergency surgery, and he's got no money. And he said he just got my phone number from a hospital who referred him. Try this lady. She's kind. And I'm like, what? Who is this person? I had no idea. So, but I verified his case. I talked to him. I met up with him, and immediately we managed to send her to the hospital. And we got that problem solved. But it was not that much of. It's not that expensive. It's not like tens and thousands of dollars. It was a few thousand ringgit. He still couldn't afford it. So they're really struggling with basic medical care. And I've even had, when we were going around visiting refugees' homes, we even met some people waiting to die. They were suffering from diabetes or cancer, and they said they just cannot afford the insulin or all the medical expenses. So you're just there with their prayer beads on their bed. And it's like, how can we just leave people like this when we know that they exist? And that's why we say we got to find a way to make our business sustainable and be able to help these people as well. And that's where I got into creating this social conscious business model involving help. We made our business a one help one model. So every paid training and public speaking engagements that I get contributes to the mindset and skill set training of refugees, and that kind of like contributes from my company. So but the way things are, it's like these are things that a lot of us are living in countries where some of these people's voices are not heard, or purposely not want to be heard, or from the locals as well, but they are there. And if the numbers increase, for me, I'm thinking there can never be a society where there's too many poor people who are living in poverty. You gotta, do something about that, make sure that at least that they're able to work, they're able to support their families. Yeah.
And and another question to you, Murshidah. I mean, we've addressed that in bits and pieces, but however, you said that you in the beginning of the conversation that you've migrated yourself. So this is more of a philosophical question, but as a migrant and someone dealing with other migrants and refugees, what are some things that people find difficult to leave behind, but they need to leave them nevertheless? And what are some things that they want to leave behind? And I'm not talking about material possessions like a car, some currency, or homes or whatever. So, what in your experience is something that people find difficult to leave behind?
leave behind from their homes, you mean, is it?
Yeah.
Maybe their families, or their comfort. Okay, I'll just share a story for myself. I mean, you can't. I don't really consider myself as a migrant, because Singapore and Malaysia is so close. It seems far now because of COVID. I haven't been back home since 2020, but it's like it's so close, right? So I'm still like, I consider myself someone from the Nusantara. So we're like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei. We're kind of like one to me. So. But meeting all the refugees and hearing their stories, I've had a person from Syria. He used to have a lifestyle that was very comfortable, had swimming pool in his homes and everything. And coming to Malaysia, they had to start as if, they're living in poverty. Like they have to, and they don't speak the language. They got to learn the language. But the Syrian guy, the Syrian boy that we kind of coached when he was 15, and he's now 21. He's going to be 22. He's now in university. He speaks 3 languages. He's learning some dialects in Malaysia as well. So he's very much integrated into the culture. Even he's very receptive of the culture and the foods and everything. And he did say about the lifestyle that they had, the comfort that they had before. They had to leave that behind and start like starting a whole life from scratch. Yeah, I've had medical doctors also who had to start as busboys in restaurants because their medical cert is not recognized. Engineers, accountants. So those are the things that they used to be middle income, and the people who can afford flight tickets to come here, they are from the middle income. Most of them are, and they have to start all from scratch. And them not knowing the language is also another thing that they have to learn to. It's a challenge that they have to overcome. So that's one of those other things that I noticed. Yeah.
Right, Adela, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll tag into that. Murshidah always brings these amazing examples, and I think, I need to add this because they're so valid, they're so real. These are real stories and real experiences, and people neglect the fact that like in the example that Murshidah just shared, this gentleman who was well off and has done well and was well educated and was established in their professional practice, now come into a place where actually you get reduced to pretty much an identity of somebody who's moved here, and you now equate somebody who's poor, and we don't see anything kind of beyond that. And what that does to a person is tremendous, actually. The loss of confidence, the kind of lack of recognition of your achievements is a massive thing. People don't really think about this, but when your identity through your environment gets reduced to something that you can't really fathom because you never really assumed of yourself to being in that position, that does a lot of damage. And you talk about well-being, and again, this is feeding into a lot of the mindsets that Murshidah was talking about, where you lose your self-confidence to the point where, why even try? I might as well, it's my fate, like you were saying, it becomes my fate. What can I do? I've got nothing, and I might as well just do this thing on the side that means nothing. And when you generate people into communities that think, well, I'm nothing and I've got nothing to contribute, and everybody's ignoring all these things that I've done in the past, and everybody ignores the fact that I'm actually educated and I can contribute, then you're going to foster a very unsustainable community that will generate issues from within. And then you've got a subsystem within the big one that is making many issues, not because the system in itself was a bad one, but the actors within it were not perceived as active units of the system. So when I say to my student, here's a really good example. In Austria, a city that I studied in, actually, in Linz, is a kind of always used as an example of here's an example of a place that does this whole welcoming thing really well. So when you move into Linz, you basically you register that you're living in the city at a kind of, it's like an immigration center. Many countries don't have those. So even to have a place where you go to and see human beings and sign up is a thing. But then what happens is they post you a letter from the mayor that is signed of a kind of welcome. We're looking forward to have you in the community. And then what they give you is a very carefully designed wayfinding system that is made out of vouchers. So it encourages people to start exploring the city from its core. So starting from the kind of main square to the periphery slowly. So here's a voucher to have something there, or, you know, here's a voucher, get a free haircut, or, you know, and talk to the locals. And then it's reciprocal. So the people who are working in the civic economy, who are part of the initiative, know that this person with the voucher is new here. So I'm going to invest in them and be like, hey, what'd you do? Which from? Welcome to the community. Let me give you a haircut, whatever. So it's very kind of simple relational aspect of generating belonging. And somebody's put in the chat, you know, about positive and negative interactions. Belonging is built through positive interactions, and it's disintegrated through negative ones. That's why it's a coefficient of belonging rather than a sense. The sense is fluid, but the coefficient is built. But we thought, oh, this is so great. This has really set a precedent. And then what happens? If you're on a student visa, for example, you know, sounds great. You're going to study there. You get all these things through the post. You're exploring the city. Okay, I'm a student, so I need money. So I need to do a job. Okay, depending what country you're from, again, the passport brings privileges. And it also means how easily you can work. So for somebody who is, you know, you look at Europe, and then you got the EU, and you've got Schengen, all these different areas of travel and accessibility. Now, if you have a non-EU, non-Schengen passport, your visa doesn't grant you that you can work, but it grants you to ask for a permit that might allow you to apply for jobs. But in order to get it, you need to pay money to go through the bureaucracy, add documents to this thing that you might not have. They're in a different language. And then they say, well, that's great, but we need it translating. So it's more money. So it costs you money to even start working. And I was talking again about generating these parallel systems. So, well, I have no choice. I tried to do the right thing and get a permit and work, but I can't. So I'll find this other way of getting paid, which doesn't contribute to the site. So again, an example, you know, we use it as a precedent all the time. Brilliant. Oh, you know, the system works very well. But there's always this aspect. And again, you know, a lot of it is set through bureaucracy that is so rigid, that is so hard to break through. But again, it's a pain point that we can address. And there has been movement, because Linz is an interesting area. Generally, Upper Austria has had, since the social turn in the 2000s, it had a lot more artists and designer becoming active in kind of participatory practices around involving communities in policy change. So there have been actually making some changes. They're very gradual, but they accumulate. But it's just an example of great, but there's always a pain point.
Yeah.
There you go. I hope that answers questions. I went on a tangent, sorry.
No, absolutely. At least I felt they were wonderful answers, and it's brilliant how both Murshidah and you bring up examples to stress upon a point. So I'm loving this conversation. So if you could also, we've also read about the design for belonging framework that you've been working. So if you could probably share an example of, a group or some people you've used it with, and what that is, what kind of results.
It's in development. It's getting there. It's a fine balance, and I keep finding myself making mistakes, but it comes from the premise that as a lot of the people who are in the chat now will be kind of dabbling into systemic design or doing systemic design. When we talk about inclusive design or structures that are inclusive, we think of this thing that, we create, here's the system, and we add points of porosity in it. So people can come in and people can come out.
Mm-hmm.
What we don't tend to think about, is what happens when people actually come into the system. What happens then? Because we think because the system is porous, it's accessible. Accessibility means inclusivity, surely, but does it? Once the people are in the system, that's when we figure out they can't long-term relate to the place, to the built natural social environments. And all these kind of barriers to inclusion are set up through systemic structures. So design for belonging wants to go beyond accessibility. It wants to invest in how do you navigate your way through this, and how you generate an identity that, you know, is happily hybrid, because hybrid identities are great. You're adding something to what's already here, but not becoming destructive to you because you might not be able to access X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of things. I had many discussions around the NHS where people think, oh, if you're here, everybody can access the NHS, or it's free for everybody. Well, number one, it's been regulated through the tax system. And secondly, if you're an immigrant on a particular kind of visa, most of them, I think it excludes if you have indefinite leave to remain. But all the other ones, you have to pay a surcharge. So you might be working full time and already doing your national insurance contribution, but then you're paying a surcharge on top of it. So you're paying twice for the same thing. So how can you generate belonging if you feel like you're a second-class citizen? You know, these are the kind of things that I'm trying to address and provide a framework that might help evaluate what we have in place now, so we can do an easier pain points analysis, and, you know, therefore check the leverage points to make change. But also, how might we start somewhere where we haven't even started yet, in incorporating beyond inclusion and beyond accessibility, you know, something that celebrates one's identity and contribution, you know, because in systems thinking, we do talk a lot about, you know, the mindset, and, you know, if we don't deconstruct the mind that has built the system in the first place, we're just going to rebuild the same thing again. And it's really a tool that should be there to challenge the mindset, thinking beyond this thing that seems so tangible but isn't really. And it's, you know, we're just looking at the kind of small lens of migration, which is huge. But in the great scheme of things of human endeavor, you know, there's so many other things to think about in this context.
Wonderful, thanks. So I know I've been doing a lot of talking, and then I am going to open the floor up to Marisa if she has questions, and then we also see some audience questions. Go for it, Marisa. Do you want to ask or share anything from the conversation we've had so far?
Thank you, Maya. No, it's absolutely fascinating. I'm deep in both of what you're both saying. That I am mindful there's a lot of questions. I just had one question for Murshidah, actually. Murshidah, just, I mean, you do a lot of kind of coaching and transformation with private organizations, you know, corporations and people who are, as we kind of call, let's say, privileged. And then we're talking about kind of the work that you're doing with the kind of marginalized, but in this case, let's say the kind of refugees. And you talk about a lot of the mindset. I just wonder, do you see a huge difference actually in the mindsets of the two different kind of groups, they're very different groups that you coach and work with, in their kind of, I don't know, kind of lack of identity or struggle or anything like that? Because the assumption on my part, at least, would be that the people in the more privileged parts of the work that you do don't struggle as much or don't struggle with the same things. Is that the case, or is there such a difference, or what kind of differences are there maybe?
Well, limiting beliefs, there's no difference, because it's like, if it's a belief system, right? So it's their belief that they cannot get something. They believe that they cannot get something because of something, or they're not worthy of something, right? So, but the objectives may be different. I mean, a person you would consider, privilege, may not think like, I cannot get past $2,000 or $3,000 income, because it's already their reality. It's maybe something like getting a relationship, getting being confident, speaking to a group of people. So it is a self-belief, again, that I work with them on. For the certain groups of people, even business owners, they have a mindset belief like, I cannot earn more than $20,000, because it is that pattern that they can't break. They cannot receive that new belief. So the work is similar, but of course the objectives are different. So it can be different things, like forgiveness, for example, like letting go of certain painful experiences that they don't want to bring into their present. So those kind of things. So for a refugee, for example, can be different. For somebody who's a different background, could be maybe something that they did not resolve with a parent or the past. So it's the work is similar, but the objectives are different. Yeah. So that's when I saw, when bringing back to why I do what I do, right? Because I saw that pattern happening over and over again, because when we were feeding the homeless people a couple of years ago, but no, more than 10 years ago, right? We were doing that for a couple of years, and we actually see, some of the children grow up. So I was sharing about this story of, my first family that we were, getting to know was this pregnant sex worker. She was 17 years old. We heard her story. We gave her food, and then she was pregnant. So we gave her, baby diapers for her to prepare for her delivery. And then when the baby was delivered, we supported her and everything. And then when the baby, then what I didn't really think much of it. It's just like, oh, I love helping people, until the toddler grew up, and whenever he sees me, he does this. He puts his hand out, and I said, am I really helping the family, or am I just feeling good about myself giving, and oh, I'm so privileged to help people, So that kind of shook me, and I said, no, they deserve to be independent and wealthy and help other people instead of depending on others and be subjected to, whatever is going on in the society. So that was when we decided to shift it to purely education and working on that rather than purely giving. So that was something, that was an incident that actually made us change and do this. So and we're saying we help executives come out of the lack of self-confidence and all of that fear of talking in public. So why not do the same for people who need it in terms of coming out of certain block? And that's what we have done. Yeah.
Thanks, Murshidah. Thanks. Great. So is Anshul, or who sorry, I wasn't sure. Anshul, are you going to call out for the questions to be read? Because we'd love to hear from the rest of the community now.
I'm looking at some of the questions here, Marisa.
Yeah, we have one. So we had a Grace. Grace, where's Grace? I see Grace somewhere. Hi Grace, thanks for joining.
My glasses.
Do you want to share your kind of thought behind your question and your question?
Yeah. And thank you everyone for your sharing. I mean, really inspiring stories. And one thing that triggers me, I mean, partly because I am an immigrant, a Hong Konger now living in London. I did want to ask, from your experience, when do you see people making an identity shift from being, okay, my identity is that I am an immigrant, to I'm part of a wider society, and yes, I am an immigrant, but I am also other things. Yeah, multiple identities holding at the same time. When do you see that shift happening?
It's excellent question, Grace. It was the question that started my inquiry, because I was asking it of myself, what am I now? And a lot of it, what I've recognized working with people and just kind of following their daily journeys, and I was talking about how a sense of belonging, when we talk about what belonging might be, a lot of people think, well, it's you're part of this system, so therefore you belong. But it's more than that. It's belonging, in the words of J.S. Powell, it's not about being merely visible in a system, but it's about actively participating in it and benefit from it. But it's also challenging and making changes to something that is around you. It's also participating in kind of political questions and questions of existence. And when people have that sense, they're actualized to demand, then they belong. And then they shift from being an immigrant to somebody who's part of this. And that's heck of a journey. And I always explain it when I do some work with my students in this context. I have to say, imagine you're meeting a new partner and you're meeting the family, and you really want them to like you. And so, you're kind of doing your best to feel like you belong here. But even in that process of getting to know these new people and exchanging with them and getting them to appreciate you for you and you appreciate them for them, there is this point where you have been holding back, where you don't quite belong yet, where you can't say certain things that bother you or things that you don't really like, or something really funny like, I don't know, I hate shepherd's pie and you always make shepherd's pie when I come around. You start to belong when you can say, actually, could we have cheese on toast instead? This is a really simple, relatable example, but on a great scale, when you start to think, well, actually, no, that policy is not helping people like me, and it's not helping people who live next door to me who might not share my experience, but I care about them because they're part of my community. You become actualized as an identity, and then you're not an immigrant, you're part of that community. And when that happens, it's magic, but it takes the environment to do with you, and it's heck of a journey. But that's a fantastic question. Thank you. I hope that answers it. Please feel free to feedback.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, really, but actually very interesting, on how you become more demanding when you're part of it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think when you're in that kind of mindset of an immigrant, you feel like you don't have to write to. I should be grateful that I can be merely here with my existence, because a lot of the systems that are set up are discouraging you from expressing yourself. But that's a bigger topic. But, to understand that you're a full human being and your endeavors are the endeavors of the society, regardless where you might be working in, whether that be business or finance or design or healthcare, whatever, you're part of it. And once you can challenge what's in front of you, I think the easiest thing we can do is to start to challenge the area of our expertise or professional practice, whatever. And it takes a mind shift. I'm going back to Murshidah, but it's all about the mindset. It's about starting to make these little shifts towards it. But yeah, that was my experience of it. It's a difficult journey because hybrid identities, there's a sense of hauntology in it where you're haunted by the prior, and you're kind of questioning, how much am I losing by adapting to this new thing? And it comes to question you. But I think we need to do a whole panel discussion on that. But yeah, there you go. I hope that beautiful. If anybody wants to talk about this more, please get in touch with me. I love talking about this.
I just want to do a little, because I love what you shared just now, and it's true about if you come from a different country, a different place, different culture, you are also in a way you don't want to offend. You just want to be able to fit in and say, okay, I don't want to, it's how I am, like at home, but it's okay. We can go wherever you want. So the need to fit in is really strong in a person. And I see that as well in the refugee communities that I work with. And one of the things that I saw, the shift when they feel like they're part of the part of the wider community, so to speak, is when I brought them into the business community. Like they want to be business owners. Okay, fine, we'll teach you on how to start your own online business, and with whatever your own talents, let's sell that online, right? So put them in the business community and just talk business. And I said, please do not say that, oh, I'm a refugee. Say, I'm a business owner. I'm a new business owner. Or I have a little small business. I hope to make it bigger. So when that comes, they're the same part as everyone else. So yeah, we're all here trying to learn to make business and support one another. And that you can see that, they become more confident and they get out of that, that oh, I'm a refugee struggling and all that. The other thing what I've done that I saw a lot of breakthrough, and I saw this is in one of the refugee women. She's now based in Canada. She's relocated in Canada already. She's Iraqi, and she went through so many traumatic background. I cannot even imagine going through that, right? I heard her story, and she's a single mom. She was almost killed by her own family members, and she's with a little child. So she's going through a lot of trauma, trying to survive in Malaysia, and also healing from her past and fear of men and everything. So I was working with her and everything. And I saw the breakthrough when we organized an event where we just call it a cultural event. It was not a refugee festival or whatever. It was like a cultural event. So we have Iraqi, we have Somali, we have Sudanese, we have Malay, we have Chinese, we have Indian, you know, everyone showing games, showing food, showing clothes, you know. We booked a big hall in a hotel. It was like a boutique hotel. We had a whole floor, and they set up their booths. They can sell stuff, whatever they created, and then everybody can have a, you know, be on stage and share about their country's culture. So that was when she was the only Iraqi there. So she was there with her dress, and she dressed up her booth. And after that, she was like, Murshidah, I am out of my chains. I'm like, oh, you were chained? She was like, I'm out of my chains. I feel so free. And that was like, for her, she got to really express herself. So I saw that and I'm like, let's do more of that. Let's do more of that. Something like that. You know, it was big budget, but we got some funds at that time to run the program. But it was something that I saw where someone like her, who was like very timid, she was so scared, she didn't trust people, she could only talk to me. And I saw that transformation, and she became like you know, she started selling Iraqi food. She started to offer her food as a business, and she got, you know, people catered, even companies catered her food for their company events and everything. So she started to make an income after that. And then she got relocated to Canada now. So yeah, and her life is so much better. And yeah, so I'm very happy. So that was one of the things I saw. And yeah, when people feel that, you know, everyone is accepting of them, and we share our differences and just share about our what we have in common, you know, in terms of how we celebrate, food that we eat, how we dress, how we play games, you know, it was a lot of fun. So it was nothing about refugee or whatever. It was just cultural event. That's what we did. Yeah.
But I can just second that. You know, that is such a key. To even claim, you know, there is more to me than this title, whatever that might. I mean, sure, I've overcome, I've conquered, and I'm here. But, you know, claiming the identity that you are, you know, and whatever you've been before, you know, you haven't lost that, you've achieved that. So it has to exist in your current identity as well. That is absolutely spot on. Thank you for sharing that. That's brilliant.
Nice. Joanne. Hi, Joanne.
Hi, Marissa. I'm sorry, I'm not on video.
You're not what? Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm on my phone, so I'm not sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I love all Murshidah and Adela shared. It just so powerful. As an immigrant from China living in Canada for more than 3 decades. My question, I think it's a sort of a build on Grace's question about identity, how just observing how the Canadian societies have changed over the last 3 decades with more and more immigrants. Mind you, I live in big city centers, Toronto, so it's very, very diverse. But in the meantime, I get asked often about things related to identity. And I remember once my own daughter asked me, if the Canadian team is playing the Chinese team, which team would you cheer in the tournament? And then she said, if it's a final, it's World Cup. It was a soccer season. It's an assumption. And that was, you know, I think 20 years ago, I didn't know. I said, yeah, which team would I cheer? Would I, you know? But now I generally say, oh yeah, cheer for the Canadian team, like genuinely. But I often feel that identity has been termed as one thing, a single term, like you're either a Chinese or you're Canadian, or you're either a Muslim or you're Christian, you either this and that. And to me, identity is such a multiplicit, emerging, using academic words and lack of better words, emergent property of a complex human being. So, and we actually show different identities in different contexts. So just like if you're in a hospital going through an operation, your identity is, I'm a patient. Are the doctors competent? So all of a sudden you don't, of course you have all the other little identities behind you as well. But I do notice that shifting in the global community, increasingly such a global, like look at this audience today. I think we just represented, it's like in UN, right, in New York City. So I think we got to start talking about multiple identities coexisting within one person. I think that's a healthy discussion in terms of migration strategies, instead of corner people. You must identify either us or them. So that's my comment and question. I'd love to hear from Murshidah and Adela about this.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's a really important point. And I think, John, you've explained it. You know, I've heard this so many times from the kind of families and generally the people that I've been working with. You know, this kind of choice. Well, you have to decide. Whilst identity, you know, so much of our identity as such, you know, as this kind of thing that exists and, you know, we kind of project onto our external environment is performative. And in the context, like you were saying, if I'm in a hospital being treated, then I'm a patient, and if I'm there, then I'm this, and I'm there, then this. What I think, what I'm really focusing on with understanding and acknowledging that, yes, it's multiplicities, because we're dealing with multiplicities of external factors at all times. But, you know, for migrants in particular, this kind of sense of dissonance is accentuated because the questions are asked of them a lot more than of somebody who is not was born and bred in that particular part of the world, or looks like a particular group of people from a particular part of the world. Yes, intersectionality, somebody's just put it in the chat, you know, there are intersectionalities of existence and identity. But I think when we're looking at the kind of lens of migrant identities, because migrants are faced a lot more with these kinds of questions of picking and choosing a team and what their existence might manifest in, the identity shifts that I talk about, they happen a lot quicker, and sometimes they're forced. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, what they breed is a superimposed inferiority. And you'll see that in many migrants, in fact, all of them that I've been working with had an inferiority complex that was superimposed by these kinds of pressures of identify as something, decide on where you might be on the spectrum. But it's definitely a conversation that we have to do. We have to have, and we have to take them a lot further. And I think whilst it is conversational now, I'm hoping to see more action on this, but it is changing. I'm definitely seeing it. I agree with you. And I think if we look at the kind of multiplicities of external factors, you can see the links. And as a designer myself, coming from the visual world, you know, design activism has contributed a lot to that. But yeah, Murshidah, I'm sure she'll have some amazing examples to share. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I believe that, you know, I love what someone said here. Joanne said the need to fit in, the need to belong. Yeah, this is it's a fundamental human emotional need, right? You want to feel acknowledged, you want to feel respected, you want to feel like you belong, yeah, you are accepted. So I won't talk so much about like what people are going through, because they are still going through it. And I can invite, even I see my friend Dr. Hassan who's here, maybe he can also share his experience. Yeah, Dr. Hassan, can you hear me? Yeah, your experience coming to Malaysia from Yemen as well. He was a doctor before. If you wanna share, you know, this it is more about what do we all have to do in our own areas of work or expertise or do it through action that we've seen this problems, we've seen what people go through. How can we make it more acceptable in our society? What can we all do? What can we create? I think that is something I'd love to encourage all of us to think of or start doing and creating, because as you see some of these transformations, and when a group of people transform and they lead their own communities, that's where change happens. And I see this already happening. Adela also mentioned that things are happening. I see it positively now, as opposed to maybe back in the 70s when I grew up and, they were openly saying, racist things, and it's okay, about different races. And now people are like, oh, that you shouldn't say things like that. It's so racist, People, I say it as it is. But before, it's like, you say about a certain community, it's like, no, nobody cares, And it's they just put each other down openly. So I think things are changing. We are starting to become more aware and more respectful of other people, and what can we do in our own work to be able to make love and respect sustainable and acceptable, and with all of this shifts that's obviously going to happen. It's not just refugees or migration coming because of wars. This climate is already, because of climate, people move because it's too cold somewhere, and I got to move to Malaysia where it's nice and hot, So it's because of that, or simply economically. I move because there are better work opportunities in my industry in that country. Yeah. And if we're going to keep doing this barriers of, especially on, they hold this passport and that is more superior than a person holding this passport. And that's why in my community, I the people that I'm coaching, I encourage them all to charge in US dollars, whatever country they're from, charge in US dollars. Yeah, you don't say, I have to charge it in rupiah. I say, no, you have the online space, charge in US dollars, because you do the same amount of work. Why is it someone from Switzerland gets paid a certain amount, and because you come from this country, you get so much less? Is your life value less? No, charge in US dollars. So that's what I do. Yay! Yeah, that's what I encourage. So yeah, let's do something.
I think we all need to just go to Murshidah's coaching sessions.
Yes,
and just
welcome.
Feed of her amazing energy and enthusiasm. I just love hearing this. This is music to my ears, and I hope that we get more people, that you just infect so many people with this enthusiasm. It's really about that action, and you are that action, and I'm trying to be that action, but I see people like you and I'm so encouraged because barriers are there, like you say, but I just love, and this reevaluation of existence is spot on. Do you want more questions, or are we supposed to go? I'm not keeping track of time, by the way.
We have 6 more minutes, right? We're ending.
Okay.
I don't know.
Marissa, what should we do? Marissa's the boss.
Sorry, no, I'm not the boss. No, I'm not at all. No, thank you. Sorry, I was really enjoying the conversation. Are there any more questions? Sorry, I'm also having trouble. I'm trying to. Wesley, do you have a question, or does anyone else have a question would like to, or something they'd like to share?
Yeah, I see 2 more questions, I think, from
okay.
One from Grace and one from Jessie. I don't know, Grace, you want to build on that, or?
I want to not dominate the conversation and see maybe Jessie, someone else who didn't have airspace.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Jesse. I from a natural systems view, I see the world is made of many, many, many kinds of cultures, each one of which gives people a great deal of freedom within the culture. But cultures are sort of silos, which are always misunderstood and misinterpreted and mischaracterized, and so it's a mix of that intersectionality really should not be focused on prejudice. It should be focused on the rich complexity of everyone's relationships.
Yeah. I'm not on mute. I thought I was on mute. But Jessie, that is so important. Thank you for bringing it up. I think when you're on a kind of train of thought of mapping out like imbalance, you can easily get into the trap of imbalance is everywhere. But intersectionality, absolutely. But there's something about revealing multiplicities, but also celebrating multiplicities, and that's something that we shouldn't really neglect. And I think that should be at the forefront of what we do. I think there, like you say, there's something about the freedom that you can kind of claim from understanding intersectionalities of your own identity and the cultures that come with that. I just think we need to talk about it more. I think even in academic kind of circles, it's not a topic that is brought up very often. And then I'm kind of questioning, like, we can often be in these academic bubbles where we talk about a certain thing, but it never reaches like, your everyday people. Not that I'm an everyday person as well, but it gets institutionalized. I think it just needs to be brought out to the public, and the public should lead it, really.
Well, one of the things I noticed is that people solve the problem by speaking in code, in a sense. The girls, when they get together, talk like the girls getting together. And they talk differently. In your family, you talk differently than with your friends. And at school, you talk differently with your friends as well as with everyone else. And so I find it a lot of people, if they're self-aware, just slightly change code as they talk to different people and relate to different people. And
that's really interesting. Yeah, I love this idea of transliterating it as what that's it's so performative, isn't it? It's so interesting. But yeah, it starts with the small changes of just opening it up. We do like it's funny, as humans we like to put borders around things for some reason. It's weird. I think it's how we've been conditioned a lot of the time, but I digress.
I see a comment from Renee in the box. Do you want to share more? You said about what you've said, Renee?
Yes, this is just following actually Adela's comment on intersectionalities, because we also don't have we shouldn't forget like agencies and bodies, because migration has to relate to bodies, right? Race has to be brought up in migration conversation. And in my studies, I'm doing my master's now, and it relates to migration, but it's looking at the education system in Spain, for example. So I was wondering what we talked about, how do we bring this conversation to classrooms, right? So if you talk to teachers who, every day they would have different kids coming from different backgrounds, and how they are adapting this, right? So this kind of changes that especially a lot in Western European countries are experiencing. And so this is my question, is how do we bring this conversation to the classroom?
Excellent question. Thank you so much, Renee. I've been working on something along these lines a couple of years back now. And I figured, whilst I was working in the communities, and this was inner city Derby, and that particular area is really hyper multicultural. There's so many different people from diverse backgrounds living in quite a condensed area, and the schools are very much kind of the hubs of community. And I twigged, okay, the schools are the hubs of community. This is where a lot of the exchange happens. This is where, you do your school run and you pick up your child, but you're also talking to that mum and that dad and so on and so forth. And that's where the kind of teachers have the opportunity to exchange with the parents. And I thought, okay, there's something in this here, because a lot the kind of multiplicities of cultures were cultures that really had a respect for teachers. So I thought that the teachers must play a really important role in this. They're kind of becoming one of the main actors that might, perform a shift. And basically, I spoke to a couple of the schools in the area and the head teachers, and I offered, like, could we talk about migration? Could we bring in people? Because in your local community, you have, kind of institute and initiatives that are working with this. And a lot of the families that you have in your school might be accessing that and you don't know about it. So how can this inform the whole cohort? And I designed, it was basically like a kind of conversational box, which is just like a product thing where you open it and it forms like a game that could be played in the classroom that encourages dialogue. And then it brings up all these things that you said, like identity, but then, racial identity and ethnic identity and religious identity. And it's open up conversations in a playful way that is kept in boundaries of respect through the facilitators, but it's explored in, a very innocent and inquisitive and curious way through children, because children just do this so much better than we do. A childlike mind wants to know, and a childlike mind does not disassociate, it wants to associate. So it starts with kind of understanding schools are quite key in this. And if you can get in the school and talk to the kind of senior management, they will be more than happy to do this, because a lot of them are looking to integrate, particularly EDI curriculum now, in the future cohorts. So that's one case study from me that has worked and has actually had brilliant results for the schools. Anybody else? Thanks.
We are at time. God, I feel like I could sit here all night. But I think, if you guys want to continue, you guys have the opportunity to connect after. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to Murshidah, thank you to Adela, and thank you to my fellow collaborators and you guys all for coming and staying. It's been absolutely fascinating. My mind's been blown just hearing from both of you and all the really interesting questions. So yeah, I just want to say thank you, and hopefully this has really kind of been interesting for everyone else as well. So yeah, I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to stop broadcasting. Stop recording.